But now I do. Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. So recently someone had asked me the question. They said, how do you give God everything? Which is a really great question, because we hear stories in the Bible about here's Jesus who comes to the rich young man, and the rich young man asks the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, the commandments, what are they? And the rich young man says, well, here they are, and I've kept all of them from my youth. And Jesus says, looking at him, loved him, and says, you lack one thing. Go sell what you have, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And the rich young man goes away sad because he had many possessions, right? His stuff owned him. He didn't own his stuff, that kind of situation. Other stories as well. Peter and Andrew, James and John. Jesus calls them, and they leave their nets and their fishing and their boats and their father, and they leave everything and they follow Jesus. And then we hear stories of saints. I mean, there's some incredible saints. St. Francis of Assisi, who stripped himself completely naked in the town square of Assisi, handed his stuff over to his father and said, listen, no longer will I say Pietro Bernardone, his biological father, is my father. From now on, I'll only say our Father who art in heaven. Just basically gives everything away. St. Anthony of Egypt is another example where apparently as a young man, he walks into the church as they're proclaiming the gospel, and he hears that if you desire to be perfect, go sell what you have, give to the poor, then come follow me. And he's like, okay. And he just goes and does it. And so we have all of these, and thousands of others, right? All of these saints, all these incredible people who have literally done that. They've given everything away in order to follow Jesus. And so this person was asking me, they said, I have a family and I have responsibilities. I have this job that I support my family with. And how do I give everything to follow after Jesus? How do I follow Jesus with everything I have? How do I give everything away? And I thought that is a remarkable question. They're different questions. How do I follow Jesus with everything versus how do I give everything away? Those are two different things. How do I give everything away? Well, you have to ask the question, is Jesus calling you to give everything away? Remember that there are people in the scriptures that Jesus did call and say, go sell what you have, give to the poor, then come follow me. There's others that we have no record that that's what he asked them to do. That when he asked them to follow him, he didn't say, go divest yourself of everything you have and then come follow me. He just said, follow me, or they just started following him. And so we don't necessarily have a blanket statement of every single Christian, every single follower of Jesus has to give everything away. But every single follower of Jesus has to give him everything. This is the key distinction. Not every follower of Jesus has to give everything away, but every follower of Jesus has to give him everything. That's the difference. So the question I get to ask is, okay, is Jesus calling me to give away everything? Because he might be. That might be there. But remember, God always speaks in clarity. If it's kind of like this, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, wait until he's spoken in clarity and then act. Get that? Okay. But God is asking you, he is inviting you to give him everything. And what that means in many ways is you're giving him access to everything. So I look at my stuff. I look at my bank account. I look at the things that I own. I look at my relationships. This one, I look at my calendar and I say, okay, God, it's all yours. If you want me to do something with what's in my bank account, I'm open. It's yours. I'm going to actually start shifting my mindset from being, this is my stuff, to God, this is yours. How do you want me to steward it? We have another video on stewarding versus owning. That's kind of the mentality, right? Okay, God, you're the steward of this. It's yours. How do you want me to manage it? Same thing when it comes to our stuff. Hey, I'm going to buy a new car. Okay, do you have any direction when it comes to what kind of car you want me to have? You might have none. You might have none. You might just say, yeah, go whatever car you want. I love you. It could be okay, that's the one you want. I remember Pope Francis saying this at one point. That's the one you want. Here, this, S-class, get one class lower. That kind of that sense of here's all the bells and whistles that you ever possibly could want. Okay, get the one just slightly less than perfect. Just kind of as an act of self-denial. You don't have to, but it's one of the ways you can exercise this sense of okay, God, it's all yours. I'm giving it all to you. So my bank account, God, is yours. How do you want me to manage this bank account? And he might want you to manage the bank account by saying, okay, invest for your children.
Okay, now who's David Henry as the adult? Who's the David Henry as the no longer on Disney Channel? When it came to the Lord, was there something that God gave you when it came to identity that was completely new in your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a complete inversion of what I thought you should do and what it means to live a successful life. God still wants, me and all of us to do great things. That Pope Benedict quote, the world offers you comfort, but you're not meant for comfort, you're meant for greatness. He wants greatness, but he's more concerned how you do it. It's the process. Because win or lose, you both sides still can get to heaven if you did it right. If you had fidelity to the grace along the way. And that concept would have made no sense to me before. I was like, how can there be any salvation or redemption in a loss or in the struggle? And it's like, I have this devotion to Blessed Karl Habsburg. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him at all. He was the last king of Austria-Hungary
Okay.
in World War I, and the last king of the Holy Roman Emperor. He suffered lots of defeats towards the end of his life, and he, from all external appearances, it would look like he failed. But all along the way, he was guided by his Catholic conscience, and he was doing things for the good of his people and of his kingdom. And he has such an incredible story of how to. It's not. He would say things like, it's not the outcome that matters. It's the getting there that matters. It's how you get there. That's the bit that's important. And he maintained his dignity, his integrity, and his faith in the face of like the biggest, the most overwhelming odds ever. um, and that's truly heroic. So that style of man, or that model of man, and I mean, look, our Lord, they by external appearances look like a defeat. That theology, that belief of what a real man is, that changed my life, completely changed me, and in a way was so freeing, because it's like you need to depend on him completely, and it's day by day, it's moment by moment along the way. Yes, it's important to want to dream big and do great things, and do as much as you can for God. That's a good thing. But what's more important is how you get
Yeah.
there, and that just completely changed my life.
Well, as you're describing that, like I'm thinking of even your work now as a storyteller, right? And that sense of, I sometimes like to think of, here's our lives as stories, and sometimes we look at the story like you described as like, okay, you're going to get to the destination. You got to win. You got to be big. You got to be excellent. Do great things. And again, I think it's placed in our heart, the desire to do great things. And I think sometimes we might, again, in our culture, we might say, what that means for me is, you know, in a new earlier generation, it was acquiring things. So I can point to my success because I have this kind of house or this kind of car, this kind of stuff. And then the new generation right now, I don't point to my stuff. I point to my experiences. So I've done this and I've done that, and I can post this and I can share this. I've gone to the Maldives. I've gone to Baja. I've gone to whatever. I've parachuted, whatever the thing is. I'm collecting experiences. And both of those are not bad. I mean, it's stuff is fine. Stuff is good. Experiences are good. But as you're saying, the process, it's one of the things I like to think of as it's not so much what you acquire or what you accomplish as much as who you become in the process. Like that sense of, even in telling stories, is, yes, the plot critically important,
Yes.
because the plot is the device by which the characters become, right? And I think sometimes in our lives, the same kind of thing is like, that's one of the reasons I think the saints have this holy indifference.
Yes.
Like, yeah, God, whatever you want to bring to me, you want to bring me a good reputation or a bad one, I'll take it, because it's not about having a good reputation or a bad one. Want to bring me success or failure, wealth or poverty, whatever, because it's about who I become on the journey. Does that resonate with what you're saying?
Oh, totally, totally. And that's growing up in the entertainment business, having millions of followers and everything, that is so hard for me to do. And it's been such a struggle in
Right.
not taking your validation. Like, I'm constantly, every day I do this like 10 times a day. So that way I fight off the temptations and say, my value as a child of God is not determined by accomplishments or people's opinions. Just very simple, but that has helped. That I just, because of the business that I'm in, I always have to pray that, because it just constantly reminds me of my identity, where it's rooted in which is such an important thing, because otherwise you seek your identity in other things. Yeah, 100%, Father.
Could
100%.
you say that prayer one more time? Just that reminder, my identity.
Sure. It's a question I ask myself like 5 times in the morning and 5 times at night. do I realize that my value as a child of God is not determined by accomplishments or people's opinions? So it's a question I ask myself 5 times in the morning and 5 times at night, very slowly. And it's usually one of the first things I do in the morning, and then one of the last things I do at night.
That's I'm really, really grateful you shared that, because a lot of times when we talk about identity and like be rooted as a son or daughter of the Father rather than your accomplishments, like, well, great, how do I do that? So that is very practical, simple. Like, right, it's not even, I love the fact that it's even a question. You're not like reciting a mantra. It's like, I'm a child of God.
It's actually on my mirror, and the question is there, and that's a positive question, right? And I actually have the negative way of saying it under there as well, because that's the temptation under it is my value is determined by what this person says or what I accomplishment. So they're both there for me. So I know, like, if I feel this tendency of, I'm getting a pleasure off of not a proper perspective on accomplishments or on success, then I gotta check that and go, this is great, but offer it up to God, in that moment.
Yeah, it's still a good thing.
Yes,
it's just
totally.
not the ultimate thing.
It's a great thing, yes. And I'm not knocking pleasure should accompany a good act, right? It's not an end in itself. It's a very good thing that should accompany something good. So I'm not being like stoic or negative at all. Like, I'm sanguine Italian. Like, I love good glass of wine. I love great food with good people. Like, that's a great thing. But that's the beauty of our faith, is we can enjoy those things and actually get grace out of enjoying those things if they're rightly ordered.
How many of us, though, act as if we own our own lives? As if our own lives are chattel, personal property of ours, to do with as we please. The world tells us that our lives and our money are ours to do with as we please. As I progressed through my career, though, I sensed that worldview might not be correct. And so I started studying wealth and its various manifestations. I started collecting data and observations about wealth. And I found that when we judge our lives, that our lives are ours alone to do with as we please, we're like the banker who gets so used to having the money in his bank in the vault that he starts thinking the money's his and doesn't belong to the guy that deposited it there. Now, when a banker starts thinking that money in the vault belongs to him rather than you, the real owner of that money has some real problems. When you and I start thinking that simply and absolutely we own the blessings we have, then the poor and the needy have problems. And God gets irritated with us. So what would God have us do with these blessings we have? I think, this may sound simple, but it's good to remind ourselves of the simple truth. I think God wants us to use our lives to grow closer to Him, to help those we love grow closer to Him, and to help others in their spiritual and corporal needs. Notably, in his encyclical that I referenced, the Holy Father notes that the market, and these are his words, is the economic institution that permits encounter between persons. Now, for those of us in business, that's a beautiful concept. The market is a good thing. It allows and permits encounter between human beings. I think the first vocation or calling of those of us in business is to be virtuous. Dave talked about virtue. That's our first vocation within business, is to be virtuous, to conduct ourselves in a virtuous way. When Pope Benedict came out with his encyclical, he specifically used the language of vocation in speaking of economic matters. But this first vocation of being virtuous is actually what we're supposed to do with any gift or blessing we have. Now, the second vocation of those in business is to create wealth. And that includes everyone here, not just the people who happen to work on Wall Street or in the financial sector. That includes everybody. We're all supposed to create wealth, which means creating something of value for others. You know what Pope Benedict said in his World Message for Peace on January 1st, 2009? This was not reported in the New York Times because it doesn't fit their mode of what the Pope ought to be saying. He said, "Wealth creation therefore becomes an inescapable duty which must be kept in mind if the fight against material poverty is to be effective in the long term." Wealth creation is an inescapable duty. And then the third vocation of those in business, giving, and giving some now. That has to be in that ordered philanthropy that Dave spoke about. But giving some now, and I'll tell you why. Giving now helps those who can't afford to wait until tomorrow. Giving now helps form us in virtue. Giving now helps us to be happy. Now, why do I make that last claim? Well, one of my heroes, John Paul II, he wrote a wonderful essay, encyclical, called Veritatis Splendor. It means the splendor of truth. What a beautiful phrase. Truth does indeed have splendor. Truth is the bottom line of philosophy. Truth can't be negated. It's there whether you acknowledge it or not. And if we continue, truth and all the good things of the earth, they're gifts. None of us earns the truth. When we figure out how an engine works, or if we discover a new cancer drug, or we find out how to teach kids more effectively, we may have worked hard to find the truth, but the truth itself is a gift. I think that one of the transcendent realities of our world is that the entire economy of this world is an economy of the gift. Economy is the Greek word to mean how things are ordered, how physical resources are ordered. And I think it's an economy of the gift. None of us, think about this, none of us earned our birth, or our parents, or our intellects, or our sensitivities, or our talents, or our spouses, or our children, or the air we breathe, or the harmony we hear with our ears, or the sunsets we see. They're all gifts. I've worked really hard all my life, but all the best things in my life have been gifts. So if I'm right that this economy of the world is one of the gifts, it is one of being the gift, then the only method in which we can be fully human, fully what we're intended to be, is being consistent with this order within the universe. Dave talked about things being ordered. We have to be consistent with the order of nature in the universe. In other words, giving a gift, philanthropy, love of others. That's what allows us to become what we're designed to be. Now, having said that, why is that hard for us to accept? I mean, theoretically that sounds kind of nice. Why is that hard for us to accept? Well, I think whether we like it or not, we've all become materialist to one degree or another. I think the world is a constant battle between the transcendent view of reality and the material view of reality. And because of the culture in which we live and that surrounds us, the easier one to have as a default position is the materialist view of reality. Whether we like it or not, we live in an illusory world that denies the transcendent rather than make the sacrifices to understand it. Understanding transcendent reality requires sacrifice, and that's difficult for us. But I think the truth and reality is in this economy of the gift. Materialism says all that matters is matter. The Enlightenment came along and we figured if we can't sense it, touch it, taste it, feel it, then it doesn't exist. But in today's world, matter matters less and less. Intangibles matter more and more. Our current market crisis has a number of contributing factors. But one of the critical factors is that intangibles on a balance sheet, they've come to represent an increasing portion of the net worth of businesses. Intangibles. Intangibles are a lot harder to understand. Intangibles are a lot harder to understand than tangibles. We can't be silly and just say they're worthless. We know that a loan on a bank's balance sheet is usually worth something. Even if today it's not worth what the bank says it's worth, it's usually worth something. The problem is, though, that the asset, that loan on a bank's balance sheet is intangible. And we have a hard time getting our hands around that. You really want to know what that asset is on a bank's balance sheet. When you see a loan on a bank's balance sheet that's an asset, you know what that is? That loan, that asset, is a representation of a relationship between human beings. That's what that asset is. You know, the root of the word credit is credo, to believe. A loan is only an asset if there's a belief by both parties that the person who borrowed the money will pay it back to the person who lent it to them. Again, the loan is an expression of order, of human relations. And when that order between human beings becomes disordered, when the belief in human beings becomes disordered, the value of the credit instrument plummets or it vanishes. I'm going to quote someone who gave us this investment hint a few years ago. At the time, he was Cardinal Ratzinger. He said this in the last homily he gave before he went into the conclave that elected him to be Pope. He said, of all the things on this earth, buildings, mountains, rivers, and art, of all the things on this earth, the only one that is eternal is the human soul. Think about that. if eternity exists, if it exists, then by far the greatest investment that can be made in reality is an investment in the human soul, our own souls and the souls of others.